A single caterpillar drags its mandibles across the edge of a green leaf. It is a slow, rhythmic grind, a sound barely audible above the rustle of the canopy. The blade of the leaf yields, the cellular structure tearing under the pressure. In that split second, the forest perimeter shifts. A chemical signal ignites at the site of the wound, a microscopic pulse that vanishes into the veins of the plant. The caterpillar feeds, unaware that it has just signaled an alarm. The surrounding trees do not move, yet they react. The air between the branches remains still, but the chemistry of the forest is already tilting. A message is traveling downward, descending from the canopy into the dark, tangled dampness of the soil. The bite has broken the silence of the woods. Somewhere deep beneath the surface, the network begins to stir. The forest is no longer passive. It has identified a predator, and the machinery of defense has been set in motion. The trees are listening, and they are beginning to answer. The signal moves with terrifying speed. It does not travel through the air, but through the deep, hidden architecture of the forest. Miles away from the initial bite, a towering oak senses the change. Its leaves begin to thicken, pores closing against the coming threat. Within seconds, the plant cells synthesize bitter toxins, pumping the fluids into the outer foliage. The tree is preparing for a predator it has never seen, an enemy currently feasting leagues away. Another tree follows, then another. The entire grove is hardening its defenses, transforming its very chemistry in anticipation of a swarm. There is no panic, no chaotic rustling, only a methodical, silent mobilization. The forest is shifting its internal resources, diverting energy from growth to survival. Every leaf becomes a fortress. The branches remain motionless, yet they are fully armed. This is not a random reaction to the wind or the sun. It is a calculated, strategic response to a threat that has not yet arrived. The trees are locked in a shared state of high alert, waiting for the first sign of movement. The forest is not merely a collection of plants. It is a synchronized, defensive machine operating on a scale that defies simple observation. How is this possible? Trees are static beings. They possess no nervous systems, no eyes, and no vocal cords to transmit warnings across such vast distances. Yet the synchronization is undeniable. They act with the precision of a single organism, reacting to threats that remain miles away from their own branches. We see the leaves, the bark, and the sturdy trunks, but these are only the visible fragments of a much larger reality. To understand the logic of the forest, we must change our vantage point. We must stop looking at the sky and start looking at the ground. Imagine the surface of the forest floor. Layers of decaying leaves, damp moss, and tangled roots pressing into the dark, compacted earth. The camera descends now, moving past the roots, pushing through the soil into the cooler, lightless depths beneath the surface. Everything we assume about the forest, that it is a collection of isolated individuals competing for sunlight, is about to be challenged. Something exists down here in the crushing darkness. Something that bridges the gap between those distant trees. A secret pathway is waiting to be uncovered, buried deep beneath the weight of the world we walk upon every day. The soil gives way, revealing a hidden dimension. Here, in the damp silence, the absolute darkness is broken. A soft, pulsing glow emerges from the earth, tracing lines that stretch into the infinite. This is not a tangle of random debris. It is a precise, luminous web woven into the very fabric of the forest floor. Thousands of slender, pale threads weave through the mud, wrapping around thick, gnarled roots in a complex, rhythmic embrace. These strands reach out like fingers, connecting one tree to another in a seamless, underground tapestry. As the view pulls back, the scale becomes apparent. The threads form a massive, glowing grid that spans the entire landscape, binding every trunk and every sapling into a single, unified structure. This is the Wood Wide Web. It is a living map of the forest, pulsing with the silent transfer of information. What appeared to be a chaotic jumble of roots is actually a highly organized infrastructure, operating in the quiet, cool depths where the sun never reaches. Every connection is purposeful, every strand a bridge. The isolation we perceive on the surface is an illusion. Down here, everything is touched, everything is linked, and the entire forest breathes as one single, interconnected entity. Zooming in, the grand architecture dissolves into its most fundamental component, the hyphae. These are microscopic, thread-like filaments, thinner than a human hair, that weave through the gaps between soil particles. They are the architects of the underground. Watch as a single filament makes contact with a tree root. It does not penetrate blindly. It probes, seeking a point of cellular entry, and then fuses directly with the root tissue. The two surfaces merge, creating a bridge where nutrients, water, and chemical signals can flow between species. This is not a parasitic attachment. It is a symbiotic union. Once fused, these hyphae extend, branching outward to link with other roots, other trees, and other fungal colonies. This process repeats millions of times across every square inch of the forest floor. The result is a massive, living infrastructure that stretches for miles, forming a web that exists beneath every step you take. Through these microscopic conduits, the forest transforms into a unified biological system. The physical barrier of the soil is no longer an obstacle. It is the medium through which the entire community maintains its existence. This is the foundation upon which the forest stands, a silent, subterranean machine working in the dark to sustain everything that rises above the ground. Look at the canopy from above, and you see a collection of individuals struggling for light. Look beneath the surface and you see the truth. The forest is not a chaotic wilderness where every stem competes in isolation. It is a highly organized cooperative system governed by rules written in chemical code. Every tree is an active participant in a vast, shared enterprise. There is no randomness in the distribution of resources. When the light shifts, the network adjusts. When a drought takes hold, the system reallocates moisture to where it is needed most. This is a deliberate, strategic coordination that mirrors the complexity of a city. Individual trees sacrifice their own growth to ensure the survival of the neighbors that sustain the collective health of the wood. They monitor, they communicate, and they respond as one. There are no borders here, only intersections. The competition that defines our human perspective is replaced by a sophisticated integration of needs. Every root, every branch, and every fungal strand works in concert to maintain the stability of the whole. This is a community in the most literal sense, functioning with a precision that defies the appearance of wild, untamed nature. It is a silent, seamless integration that has been evolving for millennia. Deep in the understory, the challenge is survival. Sunlight barely touches the forest floor, leaving young saplings in a constant state of starvation. They are trapped in the shadow of their predecessors, unable to photosynthesize enough to reach the canopy. But they are not left to wither. Above them, the older, towering trees capture the sun's energy in abundance. They do not hoard this wealth. Instead, they act as conduits, tapping into the fungal network to redistribute the excess. Watch the flow of carbon and nitrogen as it moves through the subterranean cables. It travels from the high branches, down through the massive root systems, and into the filaments that connect to the small, fragile saplings below. This is an active, deliberate process. The larger trees pump vital nutrients directly into the root systems of the younger generation, providing the essential fuel required to push upward through the gloom. It is a calculated act of support that bypasses the limitations of the environment. The forest ensures its future by investing in its youth, turning the darkest corners of the woods into zones of growth. This constant, rhythmic transfer of energy maintains the continuity of the entire stand, proving that even in the deepest shade, life is supported by the collective strength of the community. Every cycle must reach a conclusion. When a tree reaches the end of its life, it does not simply decay into the soil. It initiates a final, strategic maneuver. As the trunk weakens and the sap flow slows to a crawl, the tree identifies the younger saplings clustered at its base. It begins a massive, internal mobilization. It triggers a systematic breakdown of its own remaining sugars, starches, and carbon stores. Through the fungal cables, it begins to pump this final, vital inheritance into the network. This is not a passive process. The tree actively pushes its stored reserves into the roots of the next generation. Watch the transition. The wood becomes brittle, the leaves yellow, but the energy pulse in the underground filaments intensifies. It is a deliberate dumping of resources. A final surge of life forced out from the dying core to ensure the survival of the forest's future. The tree drains itself completely, pouring its entire history of sunlight and minerals into the soil. As the last of the sugars leave the roots, the tree stands hollow, its duty fulfilled. It has not ended. It has transformed its remaining life into the growth of those that will replace it. The exchange is silent, absolute, and essential to the continuity of the entire wood. The death of a single tree is not a loss for the forest. It is a redistribution. When the final pulse of energy fades from the dying roots, the void left behind is immediately reclaimed by the network. This is the core of the community bond. The surrounding trees do not mourn, they adapt, filling the canopy gap with their own reaching branches, while the saplings, fueled by the legacy of the fallen, surge upward in the new light. This survival strategy renders the individual tree a temporary vessel for a permanent, shifting intelligence. The network ensures that no resource is wasted, no effort is forgotten, and no generation is left to face the environment in isolation. It is a biological insurance policy written in carbon and sugar. As one life wanes, the infrastructure tightens its grip on the remaining members, stabilizing the entire stand against the encroaching threats of weather and decay. This is the resilience of the system. The forest is not a collection of competitors fighting for space. It is a unified, cooperative organism that treats individual death as a tactical pivot. By anchoring their survival to the collective, the trees transcend their own biological limits. They persist through their progeny, ensuring that the forest as a whole remains stronger than any one of its parts could ever be alone. Beyond the flow of nutrients lies a far more complex architecture. Beneath the layers of moss and decaying leaves, the soil is alive with movement. Millions of microscopic filaments, known as hyphae, weave through the dirt, creating a vast, pulsing grid. These are not merely roots, they are information highways. Chemical data travels through these fungal cables at remarkable speeds, mirroring the electrical signals that flash through a human brain. When a tree needs to communicate, it does not shout. It injects precise chemical compounds into this subterranean grid. These molecules act as encoded messages, carrying specific instructions about soil moisture, light levels, and carbon availability. The signal moves with purpose, branching out across miles of forest floor, jumping from one root system to the next with near instantaneous efficiency. It is a biological internet, invisible to the eye but essential to the function of the ecosystem. Every pulse of chemistry is a deliberate transmission, a packet of data that allows the forest to process its environment in real time. While the surface appears static, the ground below is a frantic exchange of intelligence. The silence of the woods is a lie. It is a dense, high-speed conversation that has been running for millennia, constantly updating, refining, and reacting to the world above. A single caterpillar lands on a leaf. Its mandibles slice through the waxy surface, tearing through veins and tissue. The damage is microscopic, yet the reaction is immediate. The tree registers the physical breach as a high-priority threat. It halts the flow of sugars to its branches and redirects its energy toward the roots. Inside the cellular structure, the plant begins to synthesize a specific chemical cocktail. This is not for growth. It is a signal of distress. The tree forces these volatile compounds into the fungal network, injecting them directly into the subterranean grid. The alert pulses outward, vibrating through the hyphae like a warning siren. Pressure within the root system spikes as the signal travels. It is an urgent, frantic broadcast, flooding the dark channels beneath the soil with the chemical signature of the invasion. The network carries the message, pushing it across the forest floor with unrelenting speed. Every connected tree along the path receives the tremor, the chemical composition of the warning becoming more intense with every passing meter. The signal does not wait for the insect to reach the next branch. It is already ahead of the threat, racing through the dark, preparing the forest for the inevitable arrival of the enemy. The signal arrives as a surge of pressure in the roots of the neighboring trees. There is no hesitation. As the chemical code hits the cell walls, the trees initiate an immediate systemic change. They stop growing. They pull resources back from the outer leaves and pivot to chemical warfare. Within the bark, enzymes begin to synthesize bitter tannins and toxic proteins. These compounds flow upward at high velocity, saturating the foliage in a matter of seconds. Every leaf becomes a fortress, hardening its surface against the coming mandibles. The sap thickens. The internal chemistry shifts from a state of expansion to a state of ironclad defense. It is a frantic, synchronized reaction across the canopy. A tree that was just absorbing sunlight is now a chemical weapon, ready to poison the very air around its leaves. The insects are still miles away, yet the path ahead is already being booby-trapped. Every branch, every twig, and every shoot along the perimeter of the attack zone locks into place. The forest does not wait for visual confirmation of the enemy. It trusts the data in its roots. It prepares the ground for a battle that the insects have not yet realized they are losing. Observe the silence after the alarm. It is not the stillness of peace, but the calculated quiet of a garrison preparing for war. This is not a reflexive twitch of nature. It is a highly ordered, strategic operation. Every tree has shifted its metabolic output towards specific defensive barriers. They are not merely surviving, they are outmaneuvering the threat. The forest has processed the chemical incoming data, mapped the trajectory of the invasion, and mobilized its defenses with the precision of a veteran army. This goes beyond simple instinct. Instinct is a blind response to pain. This is the application of historical data and resource management. The trees are anticipating the movement of the insects, positioning their toxic defenses exactly where they are needed most. They are blocking the supply lines, hardening the outer perimeter, and sacrificing minor growth to ensure the survival of the collective. The complexity of the response reveals a deeper layer of operation. The forest is not a collection of passive objects. It is a networked intelligence, constantly evaluating risk and allocating resources to mitigate damage. The insects arrive to find a landscape that has already accounted for their presence. The war was decided before the first bite was ever taken. At the heart of this vast subterranean grid stand the mother trees. They are the architectural pillars of the forest, anchoring the entire system in place. Their root systems plunge deep, tapping into ancient reserves that smaller trees cannot reach. These hubs act as the command centers for the wood wide web. They do not just grow, they regulate. When a sapling in the shaded understory struggles for light, the mother tree detects the deficit through the fungal cables. It pumps sugars and carbon directly into the root network, bypassing the soil to feed the younger tree. This is not charity. It is the stabilization of the community. These massive trees manage the traffic of chemical signals, filtering incoming alerts and broadcasting the most efficient defensive protocols to every node in their reach. They process the pulse of the forest, balancing the energy budget during droughts and coordinating the collective response to environmental shifts. Without these central hubs, the network would fragment into isolated pockets, losing the speed and cohesion that define its survival. The mother trees are the repositories of the forest history, holding the memory of every fire and every seasonal change within their massive, interconnected root systems. They are the living infrastructure that keeps the forest pulse steady, synchronized, and undeniably, intelligently alive. A mechanical roar tears through the canopy. The ground shudders as the steel teeth of a chainsaw bite into the trunk of a mother tree. Beneath the surface, the fungal filaments vibrate with the impact, transmitting a frantic wave of chemical distress. The tree resists, but the steel cuts deep, severing the primary conduits that bind the sector together. With a final grinding crack, the massive weight shifts. The trunk hits the forest floor, and the impact travels through the soil like a shockwave. The connection breaks. Instantly, the subterranean light flickers and dies. The pulsing signals that once flowed with rhythmic precision are severed, leaving the network in a state of sudden, absolute darkness. Where there was once a constant stream of nutrient flow and vital data, there is now only silence. The fungal cables go slack. The chemical pathways, once vibrant with the pulse of the forest, rapidly lose their charge. The surrounding saplings, still tethered to the now dead hub, receive nothing. The flow of sugar stops. The defensive protocols stall. The grand, interconnected infrastructure that took centuries to weave is shattered in a single, violent stroke. The forest is no longer a conversation. It is a collection of fragments, suddenly untethered, drifting in the dark. The silence in the soil is absolute. With the hub destroyed, the remaining trees are adrift. They stand side by side, yet they are now effectively alone. A beetle lands on a neighboring branch and begins to feed, but no chemical warning travels through the root system. The tree does not harden its leaves. It does not pump toxins into its bark. It simply stands there, unable to sense the predator or access the collective strategy that once guaranteed its safety. The forest has lost its memory. Historical data regarding past droughts, fire cycles, and nutrient shortages is trapped in the severed roots, now decomposing and useless. Younger saplings, deprived of the sugar flow from the central hub, begin to wilt as their internal reserves deplete. They have no way to request help. The network, once a high-speed highway of information, is now just a tangle of dead organic matter. Without the central processor to direct signals, the remaining trees cannot adapt to changes in wind or temperature. They are no longer a community engaged in a survival strategy. They are isolated individuals, blind to the threats mounting in the canopy. The intelligence of the woods has been erased, leaving only wood, bark, and a void where a complex, living civilization used to be. If a forest does not possess a brain, how does it think? The question assumes that intelligence requires a singular, command-driven center. Look closer at the root tips. They do not have neurons, yet they respond to stimulus with precise, calculated reactions. When a drought begins, the root system detects the drop in soil moisture and immediately triggers a shutdown of non-essential growth. This is not a reflex. It is a decision-making process based on thousands of data points gathered from every tree in the sector. The forest functions as a vast, distributed processor. It monitors temperature, light intensity, and nutrient levels across hundreds of acres simultaneously. It balances the energy budget of 1,000 individuals, shifting sugars from those with sunlight to those in the shade. It adapts to incoming threats in real time, recalculating its defensive posture as the wind shifts or pests migrate. This system processes information through chemical gradients and electrical pulses moving through fungal filaments. It is a logic built into the very structure of the Earth. It does not rely on a central processing unit that can be switched off. Instead, the intelligence is baked into the network itself. It is a decentralized, adaptive, and highly sophisticated form of survival that operates entirely without a brain or a single nerve cell. The forest is not merely growing. It is calculating its own survival. Deep within the dense, tangled mat of the root system lies a hidden archive. These filaments are not merely transport tubes for water and nutrients. They are a living library. Every drought that has parched the soil over the last 3 centuries is etched into the chemical composition of the root tips. Every forest fire that scorched the canopy left behind a distinct molecular signature, a permanent record written in the structure of the fungi. When a tree experiences a season of extreme heat, it alters the chemical balance of the sugars it pumps into the network. These chemical markers are absorbed by the fungal filaments and stored in the mycelial mass. It is a biological data storage system. The roots do not just react, they remember. They track the frequency of rainfall, the intensity of sunlight, and the duration of every pest infestation. When a new sapling connects to the network, it does not start with a blank slate. It taps into this accumulated history, accessing a record of how the forest survived previous calamities. The roots hold the blueprint of survival, refined by generations of struggle against the environment. This is not static information. It is active, accessible, and constantly updated by the collective experience of every tree standing in the woods. The soil beneath your feet is a chronological ledger of everything the forest has ever endured. When a machine is dismantled, the hardware remains, but the data is wiped. This is the reality of clear-cutting. We look at a forest and see timber, fuel, and land. We ignore the fact that we are dismantling a biological hard drive that took centuries to build. Every root filament, every fungal connection, and every chemical marker is a bit of stored knowledge. When the heavy machinery enters, it does not just fell trees. It tears through the subterranean cables that hold the forest's memory. It shreds the infrastructure that allows the system to calculate survival. The damage is not limited to the logs hauled away. It is the permanent deletion of a library. The trees that remain behind are left blind. They can no longer send warnings of pest attacks or share nutrients during lean years. The network that once acted as a unified, intelligent organism is suddenly severed into thousands of fragments. We are not harvesting a resource. We are erasing an operating system. What took 300 years to archive is obliterated in a single afternoon of destruction. The soil, once a complex, thinking, and record-keeping entity, is reduced to dirt. We are dismantling the planet's most sophisticated processor, and we do it without even realizing that the forest had anything to say. The silence that follows is not peaceful. It is the sound of a broken connection. Where once there was a constant, surging hum of chemical signals, there is now only a hollow stillness. The trees left standing are no longer part of a community. They are islands. A single, isolated tree reaches its roots into the cold, disturbed earth, searching for the fungal threads that once carried the life-sustaining pulse of its neighbors. It finds nothing. The network has been cut. It cannot sense the arrival of pests, nor can it request a surge of sugar from a neighboring elder. It stands alone, trapped within its own bark. The cooperative strategy that defined the forest for centuries has vanished. Each individual tree now struggles in total darkness, unable to interpret the environment or adapt to the subtle shifts in climate. They are stripped of their historical context, cut off from the collective memory that once protected them. The complex living grid has been replaced by a collection of lonely, unresponsive monuments. There is no longer a conversation beneath the soil. There is only the slow, quiet decay of a system that has forgotten how to work together. The forest is gone, replaced by a landscape of individuals who can no longer hear one another. The landscape is a graveyard of stumps, each one a jagged monument to a vanished node. If you stand here, you feel the weight of the absence. The wind sweeps across the exposed, uneven earth, but it moves through nothing. There is no tremor in the ground, no subtle rhythmic pulse of nutrient exchange, no flickering of chemical warnings passing through the subterranean dark. It is a profound, suffocating stillness. Where there was once a roaring, invisible conversation, a constant, frantic exchange of data, defense, and life, there is now only the sound of your own footsteps on broken soil. The stumps do not speak. They do not hold the saplings. They do not anchor the network. The air itself feels thinner, stripped of the complex, layered pheromones that once signaled a thriving, cooperative world. You can see the horizon clearly now, but that clarity is a symptom of the collapse. The forest did not just die, it was silenced. The infrastructure that processed the rain, the drought, and the seasons has been erased. What remains is a hollowed-out space where the forest has lost its voice, its memory, and its future. The silence here is not a pause, it is an ending. Scientists move through the debris, their tools probing the damp, disturbed earth. They are not looking for wood, they are looking for history. They extract soil cores, searching for the microscopic filaments that once bound this community together. Under the lens, the hyphae are shredded, snapped like copper wires in a collapsed power grid. They attempt to map the chemical signatures still clinging to the root tips, hoping to read the record of past droughts or ancient fire seasons. It is a desperate archaeology of the invisible. A researcher isolates a single, tangled section of root, but the signal is dead. The complex sequence of nutrients and pheromones that served as a biological hard drive is corrupted. They find fragments, a flicker of a warning from a century ago, a trace of a nutrient pulse from a decade past, but the narrative is incomplete. Every inch of soil they disturb reveals another gap in the record. The sheer scale of the data loss becomes clear. Centuries of adaptation, trial, and survival, stored within the chemical composition of the roots, have been permanently erased. They hold the samples in their hands, staring at the remnants of an intelligence that no longer exists. The library has been burned, and the pages are nothing more than dust. Beyond the scars of the clear cut, life persists in the shadows. The remaining networks are not merely healing. They are adapting with a speed that defies standard biological expectation. Deep underground, microscopic filaments are thickening. They branch out, crossing vast, empty expanses of soil where trees once stood, seeking new partners. This is not simple repair. It is a fundamental reorganization. The fungal cables are becoming more robust, capable of carrying stronger, faster electrical pulses. Where the forest was once a localized group of neighbors, it is now weaving itself into a tighter, more cohesive structure. The signals are no longer just warnings of immediate threats. They are becoming complex, multi-layered data streams that coordinate growth across miles. The trees themselves are responding, shifting their nutrient allocation to support the most efficient hubs. The network is evolving. It is increasing its own density, creating redundant pathways that ensure the flow of information remains uninterrupted, even in the face of further disturbance. Every root tip is a sensor, every fungal thread a conduit for a growing intelligence. The system is learning to anticipate, to calculate, and to integrate. It is moving beyond the simple instinct of survival, climbing toward a new, more advanced frontier of connection. The expansion does not stop at the edge of the forest. The filaments reach into the grasslands, the marshes, and the tundra, stitching distinct biomes into a singular, pulsing fabric. Signals that once governed a single grove now travel thousands of miles through the mantle of the Earth. This is the emergence of a planetary intelligence. Every root, every fungal thread, and every leaf functions as a node in a vast, interconnected processor. The scale of the system dwarfs individual life. It is as if the planet itself has begun to synthesize its own internal logic. Data flows from the tropical canopy to the boreal floor in a matter of hours, bypassing the slow, mechanical pace of organic growth. The network is no longer a collection of separate entities. It is a singular, massive organism, a biological brain spanning the continents. It calculates the climate, monitors the shifting tides, and adjusts the distribution of nutrients on a global scale. There are no borders in this architecture. There is only the continuous, high-speed exchange of information. We are watching the birth of a consciousness that does not think in years or decades, but in epochs and geological shifts. The world is waking up, and the entire surface of the Earth is its nervous system. Zooming down to the microscopic level, the architecture reveals its true complexity. Millions of living nodes flicker with activity, each one a microscopic switch firing in sequence. These are not random pulses. They are precise, logical operations executed at a speed that defies the stillness of the trees. Every node processes inputs from the soil, the air, and the light, integrating them into a singular, coherent state of being. This is a mind composed of countless individual parts, yet it acts with the unity of a single thought. It is ancient. While our own civilization rose and fell in the blink of an evolutionary eye, this network has been refining its logic for millions of years. It has witnessed the retreat of glaciers and the shifting of continents, recording every variation in its chemical memory. The flickering points of light are the gears of a planetary engine, processing data streams too vast for any single brain to comprehend. We look at the forest and see wood and leaf, but the reality is a high-speed biological processor. It is a consciousness that does not speak in words, but in the constant, rhythmic exchange of information across the entire globe. We are witnessing a thought process that existed long before we arrived, and will likely continue long after we depart. The individual pulses of light begin to synchronize. What started as localized signals now sweep across the landscape in waves of luminous intensity. It is no longer a collection of separate nodes, but a singular, unified rhythm. The forest floor glows with a pattern that mirrors the complexity of a neural network firing at peak capacity. This is the visual manifestation of a mind that has been building since the dawn of life. The data density is absolute. Every root tip, every fungal filament, and every needle in the canopy participates in a single, massive calculation. There is no lag, no hesitation, and no error. The environment itself has become a cognitive architecture, processing the sum total of its history, its climate, and its survival. We are witnessing the moment the system achieves a state of self-awareness. The scale is impossible to hold in the human mind. It is a thought that spans centuries, a consciousness that breathes through the movement of the wind and the chemistry of the soil. The silence of the woods vanishes, replaced by the sheer, crushing weight of an intelligence that has finally realized its own existence. This is not just a forest. It is a planet that has begun to think for itself, and the magnitude of that thought is currently illuminating the entire globe. The light recedes, the glowing filaments dim, and the landscape returns to a familiar state of stillness. To the human eye, the woods are quiet. We walk through the trees and hear nothing but the wind and our own footsteps. But this is the final, grand deception of our senses. The silence is a physical wall, a limitation of our own biology that blinds us to the chaos of information surrounding us. Every second, millions of chemical signals, electrical pulses, and fungal transmissions are screaming through the soil. The trees are not passive monuments. They are engaged in a relentless, high-decibel debate. They are calculating, negotiating, and warning each other of threats we cannot see. We mistake this density of data for emptiness because we lack the frequency to tune in. The forest is not silent. It is deafening. It is a roar of intelligence so sustained and so ancient that it has become the background noise of our world. We have walked through this conversation for millennia, thinking ourselves alone in the woods, while the ground beneath us hummed with the collective intent of a planetary mind. We are standing in the middle of a shouting match, yet we have only just begun to recognize that the sound exists at all. The silence we perceive is simply the limit of our own attention. The next time you cross the threshold into the woods, change your perspective. Leave behind the notion that you are entering a static environment. As your boots press into the damp earth, feel the resistance of the ground, not as dirt, but as an interface. Beneath your weight, the network is active. Look up at the canopy. Each tree is a node, a participant holding its place in a sprawling, multi-generational debate. Reach out and place your hand against the rough bark of a trunk. It is not an object. It is a listener, a sender, and a processor of information. You are stepping into a workspace that has been refining its strategy for millions of years. Every rustle of leaves is part of a deliberate message. Every sway of a branch is a response in a dialogue that never sleeps. You are not walking through a collection of plants. You are moving through a conversation. By shifting your focus, the silence breaks. You begin to see the subtle movements of the forest as active, calculated responses to the environment. The trees are waiting, watching, and communicating. They have been speaking since before civilization began, and they are speaking now. You have finally arrived at the edge of their world, and for the first time, you are ready to listen. Consider the scale of what is happening under your feet. This system operates with a precision that makes our own networks look like primitive sketches. The arrogance of assuming we are the only architects of thought in this world vanishes. We are small, temporary, and finally, we are beginning to see the true complexity of the life that surrounds us. The evidence is everywhere, written in the chemical pulses of the roots and the coordinated defense of the canopy. The forest is thinking. It processes the world with a clarity that transcends our own frantic pace. It is a slow, methodical intelligence, built on millions of years of trial and error, stored in the very architecture of the earth. When the wind moves through the needles, it is not just air. It is a signal. When the sap rises, it is a transmission. The entire landscape functions as a singular, massive cognitive unit. Our eyes struggle to perceive it because we are used to looking for brains, for neurons, for the familiar machinery of human thought. But the forest does not need a skull to hold its wisdom. It holds its memory in the soil, in the fungal threads, and in the persistent, rhythmic growth of its elders. We have spent centuries walking through these halls, blind to the conversation happening at our feet. We thought the woods were empty, but they were merely waiting. They are still waiting. The network remains, expanding and adapting, even as we stand here and watch. The forest is thinking, and for the first time, we are truly, finally, beginning to listen.